Okay, welcome. I see that a lot of us are here already. Thanks for being on time. Thanks for being ready to rock this morning, this wonderful sunny morning in Columbus. I hope it's sunny where you are too. My name is Tom. I think you all know me, and it's really good to see you today. I hope this space between Thanksgiving and the holiday break is as festive for you all as it looks from the outside. For those of you working in schools, I know everyone's in a very cheery mood right now, and everything's going very swimmingly as we head to break. So I hope everyone out there is feeling that. Um, Anyways, if you haven't done so already, please share your name and region to the chat box. Say hello to a friend that you might see. Um, let's get in touch with each other this morning. Appreciate you all jumping into the chat there. We have a jam-packed agenda today, so we're going to keep kind of flowing right into that. And what today's agenda looks like is that we will I'm welcoming you right now. So welcome, if I've not already said that. Welcome to be here. So we're done with number one. We're gonna have a couple announcements from the center, just to keep you guys abreast of what's going on in our world and things that you can connect some of your networks to. Then we're gonna have a great presentation from Dr. Brett Zyromski, who is a professor at school counseling here in our college and university. So we're really excited about that. And we'll introduce Dr. Z here in just a moment, and then we'll have a debrief and some time to share your thoughts on the session. So if no one objects to kind of those things, we will keep this show on the road. So we got a couple announcements here today. And one announcement I want to start with is about the network, the FCE Network's book study. Now, that is a work group that some of us are in, and we're taking a really deep look at the book, having some discussion about it in person, and collecting some resources that can be shared to be used in future book studies or a self-paced book study. But we just wanted to let you all know that if you did have the book or wanted to check in, we are doing bi-weekly discussions on Edmodo. So, whether you start reading it, a month ago with us, or you get started after the new year or just pick it up down the road, those conversations will be kind of ongoing there. So feel free to jump into Edmodo. That book, again, is called Just Schools. By Anne Ishmaru, and it's pretty interesting. It offers a kind of new perspective on things that we've been talking about together for a long time. So I recommend the book so far. It kind of challenges some of the ways we think and some of the standard frameworks for family engagement that we've adopted. So it gives you a unique perspective. But just want to let everyone know that whether you can be in the group or not, you're allowed to participate in any of those activities. So feel free to jump in there. I want to take a moment here to pass it over to our colleague, Kristen, who is in charge of our advisory council. And we want to give an announcement today on the update to some recruiting of our advisory council and how Kristen approached recruiting so that we could try to expand the variety of voices that we had on our council from across Ohio. How are you today, Kristen?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me today. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Yeah, I'm just really here to share, as some of you may know or may not know, our center has a state advisory council that really kind of guides the work that we do. And more than 50% of them are parent, caregivers, or family members. And the remaining council are made up of organizational members across Ohio. Our goal every year is try to be as diverse as possible. and to recruit families that can share their different perspectives and life experiences. And for some of you, you might be going through an advisory council process at the moment, or maybe thinking about creating one and wondering, how can we reach different families that look racially diverse and culturally diverse, et cetera. It can be a challenge, and we deal with this every year. I kind of made it a point this year to really dig deeper to try and expand our reach. So some of the things I wanted to share with you all today that might be helpful to you in your recruiting process. Two of the things that we did first was on our application itself. So we took a look at it and we thought, it's really not clear why our families should invest their time with us. So we made a statement that was very clear in our application that if you become a member of our council, this is why it's important. This is why, we would like for you to spend 3 hours of your time 4 times a year during the day on Zoom. These are the benefits to you and to your family if you join our council. So that was something that I don't think was clarified in the last couple of years. The second thing was we looked at the questions that we had on our application, and we wanted to revise the wording to be very deliberate and ask, or to kind of state what type of families we were looking for. So we took very special thought and we rephrased some of the language and let them know that our mission for our council was to bring together a racially diverse group of families that would provide different perspectives. So that was deliberately put in the application and in the questions. The third thing that we did is we looked at our current contacts and our stakeholders, and we reached out to them directly and said, these are kind of the families that we are looking for. This is our mission. Would you please think about a family that you might know that would fit this mission and personally invite them to apply to our council? We had a lot of success with that. And the last thing that we did as a group, we researched racially diverse support groups and organizations in Ohio. You can easily do it yourself. You can go on Google, start Googling different racially diverse groups. And we created a contact list. And then we wrote a letter and we asked them to share the application with their organizations. And we let them know that we could also take that application and put it in any language, translate it in any language should they request it. And also to let them know if they became a member of our council, we would provide them translation services. So we're trying to break down the barriers. We're trying to let them know that we want them, we want their voices. We don't want them to have any barriers coming to this. So just some food for thought if y'all are doing an advisory council, and I hope that I helped in some way. Oh, and we are in the process of filling 15 spots, and we have gotten 57 applications this year for 15 spots. And we are currently narrowing that down, and it's such a challenge because of what we did here. We have such rich applications this year. So I am very excited, and I think our council is going to be so diverse and so beautiful. So that's my update.
Thank you, Kristen. And thanks for giving a little insight into kind of ways, you can practically and insightfully try to diversify processes where you're seeking feedback, you're seeking membership on organizations. I know that all of us are kind of involved in that, whether we run organizations or whether you sit on a board that might take applicants or something like that. So thinking about, expanding voice to all parts of our state, I think is something we can always be getting better at. So thank you very much. We have one more announcement from our colleague here, Hadley, about some courses that are going on. How are you doing today, Hadley?
Good morning. I'm doing well. I'm happy to see everybody's face this morning, whether it's your live face, I see a few of you, or your lovely pictures. I even see a few people's kids. So that's nice to see this morning. I wanted to share about 3 course offerings. You probably got some information about that from us, but I'm excited to tell you a little bit about it. We are offering our very popular Foundations of Family Engagement course again this winter. So that is currently registering, and that is registering now through January 14th. So that course is specifically for early career family-facing professionals, particularly teachers, although people in a wide variety of roles and a wide variety of experience levels have found a lot of usefulness in that course. We already have 189 registered. So if you know of people who are interested, tell them not to delay to sign up. The course is hybrid. And one thing to know about that course is it's really important that folks, when they sign up, that they are prepared to participate in all pieces of the course. There are synchronous workshops and we meet together, and those are really important, so you can't skip those. And the course runs from January 17th through February 8th. I believe Meredith is putting some information in the chat where you can find out a little bit more about the times that you're committing to if you sign up or if you pass that along to other people. We are offering an option to either take the workshops in the evening on Monday evenings or in the mornings on Tuesday mornings. We're trying to build in some flexibility because we know that sub coverage for teachers is tight this year, and so it's maybe not possible to cover people missing classes during the school day. Another course that we're offering is Partnering with Families in Early Literacy, and that's a totally self-paced course with a lot more flexibility for people who want to kind of take that in their own time. It's completely asynchronous, so people will not be meeting in groups. They just take the content at their own pace. That's registering from now until May 31st, but the course needs to be completed by June 24th. So that does give a little window into the summer if people want to get to that after the school year ends. This is best for teachers in grades pre-K through 3rd grade. It is Ohio approved for credit in Okra, and we already have 108 registered there. We got some feedback that we maybe weren't clear enough that it is Ohio approved for Okra credit. So do make sure that your networks know that, and that's been updated on the flyer so that people know. And maybe people didn't see that until they got to the registration portion. And the last course I wanted to tell you about is that some of you may have heard, if you're connected with NAFSCI, that they are designing a course with their reframing content, the reframing the conversation in family engagement. And they have designed a reframing course specifically for Ohio. So they've designed one for other places and sort of a general one, but we have one that's Ohio specific, and that's coming soon. And it will be 10 modules and another self-paced course. And that'll be really excellent for administrators and other folks who really want to advocate for family engagement within their spheres of influence. It's a pretty high level course when I've looked at it. And so maybe not the best for people who are just starting out in family engagement, but for those of you who've been doing this work for a while and know people who are really committed to it, it's really excellent for people who are ready to take their practice to the next level. So be looking for more information on that, and we will probably be offering some professional learning communities around that in partnership with NAFSCI. So the one for Ohio Credit was the Partnering with Families in Early Literacy. And both Foundations and Partnering with Families, Foundations of Family Engagement and Partnering with Families for Early Literacy are 6 CEUs. If you have any other questions, you can message me in chat. I think I have one question I'll be answering in just a second. But if you think of others, feel free to ask me.
Thank you so much, Hadley. That's something we've been, Hadley specifically, and others on the team have been working really hard on and revamping since the first times we attempted that. And I think this is a really great opportunity for some people in your networks, maybe some of you for the reframing and stuff. So think about that. We're so excited to share that with you. So now we come to the reason we are all here. I want to take a moment to introduce our guest today, who's going to be getting kicked off our professional learning series on mental health and family engagement. We got together, back in August, and it was so clear, I think, when we came together, that a topic that needed addressing for our own professional learning and in the networks of school leaders and district leaders that we support is mental health and family engagement. So we're really excited to kick off this series, and we do it today with a pretty accomplished thinker in the field. Dr. Brett Zyromski is an assistant professor at The Ohio State University. His scholarship focuses on the impact of evidence-based interventions in school counseling, evidence-based school counselor education, and evaluation in school counseling. Dr. Zyromski is the co-founder and co-chair of the National Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference. He has published over 25 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters related to school counseling issues, has delivered over 100 international, national, regional, and local presentations, and has served numerous international and state conference keynotes. Dr. Zyromski also works with us at SEAT. That's how we know him, from working with us on the middle school project, among other things, and just generally advising us on things in the field of school counseling. And he's been super supportive to his work, or to our work at the center. So please take a moment to welcome Dr. Zyromski in the chat, and I will turn it over to our esteemed speaker now. Welcome, Dr. Z.
Thanks, Tom. I'm really excited to be here with everyone. And I think you actually did phrase it well when you said that our work together has been incredibly beneficial to me. So I think that I've really been, I've benefited tremendously from this partnership and collaboration with the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. And I'm gonna be looking at multiple screens today, just so you know, and I also have the chat open because that's the way that we interact, and also have a screen with you all open because I am a counselor, which means that I'm doing the affect and looking at your faces and getting feedback from you as we go through too, to adjust and make sure you have what you need. So anyway, good morning, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you this morning. So when Dr. Boone and Tom and I were talking about who you are and the ways that you're helping schools across the state of Ohio and consulting and really supporting all the work, I kind of shifted a presentation that I've done a few times and made it in a way that I hope that you can take it and use it. And so I'm going to pause here for a moment because I have a direct link. We can put it into the chat, the direct link there, the bit.ly link, but there's also the QR code. And so I do want to take, thanks, Dr. Wellman, for doing that. I do want to take about 30 seconds here and just pause because I want to make sure that you have this. This presentation is not a just sit and get from me to you saying, here's everything we know. I'm going to share the research that I found and build off the experiences that we're having in schools and that you probably see with kids in your household and you see in the community and all those types of things due to the pandemic. But one of the main takeaways that I was hoping for today was to equip you with resources so that you can take this and you can then use it in any sort of professional learning environment that you want. So I guess what I'm saying is you have permission, and I have many things linked in here. I have many resources linked in here for you, and that was intentional so that they could be kind of one-click resources for you. You could go get the original resource, you could use it in your own presentations. And so I welcome you to open up the slide deck, to download the slide deck, to keep it, and to use it for your own use, helping kids. So anyway, that was my intent today. The title is Fostering Student Success in the Pandemic Beyond. So, you know, it's little things that we're trying to do. It seems like a big thing that we're going to tackle today. But ironically, there are things that we're already doing that are incredibly helpful for our kids and our families. And we're going to build off of those. So I'm going to, if people have the links in the chat, so I'm going to go on to our next slide, which is a little bit of a review of Tom's wonderful introduction of me, but also the most important thing for me is in the chat, if you don't mind, you may have just had a conversation like Tom said a few months ago around what you're hoping to get out of these series. But from just the title, knowing that we're going to talk about the pandemic and knowing that we're going to talk about what's happening in the pandemic and what we see at our schools. So I guess you don't need to look at my face for all of this. We could go back to the other slide. But I did wear a blue shirt so that you knew it was me. But in the chat, if you could write, what is it that you're hoping to leave with today? What you're hoping to gain from our time together over the next 90 minutes? That would be fantastic. So if we could just see like a waterfall in the chat of people saying kind of what they're hoping for. So about some evidence-based programs and resources to support stakeholders. Thanks, Heidi. I have links for you directly to those. So those will be accomplished for sure. So if you don't feel like that's accomplished, then contact me directly and get me more stuff. Small strategies, we can definitely build off of stuff you're already doing, Joshua. So I like strengths-based approaches. And so there's already things that people are doing in pretty much every school that builds protective factors. So we'll get that. Resources, I have many slides that just list resources for you. So you're going to leave with slides of resources, but also tables of resources, things that you can take and use right away. Virtual social opportunities for kids who feel isolated or for parents. That is a great one. I'm going to write down because I don't necessarily directly impact that one. And so we can brainstorm that together and crowdsource it. So give me a second just so I can take notes. I don't want to lose that from Michelle. All right, so again, we're going to go through this and anxiety. That is definitely something that is a pandemic of itself right now. And so we'll talk about anxiety and then give you a lot of strategies to use. If you're talking about like, what can you do with school counselors and what can you do with mental health professionals in your school and what can they do to help? There's programs called Coping Cat and the Cat Project directly for anxiety, and they can take those programs. So like if you have school counselors in your school or school psychologists in your school, or if you have any mental health support in your school, Coping Cat and Cat Project are like $28 on Amazon. They can download them, they can alter them, they can make them tier 1 instead of tier 2 or 3. They'll understand as mental health professionals the constructs of what they're trying to build out of those evidence-based programs. And those are both evidence-based programs, by the way. They've been around for quite a long time. And they really, really help with anxiety, especially acute anxiety. So just off the wall, you can jump on those and Hadley, even if you wanted to Google that real quick, you could put a link into the Amazon link for Coping Cat and Cat Project. It'd be a really simple takeaway if you don't mind, or someone else. So I'll only pick on Hadley because we've been working together for a couple of years and she's amazing. So you bet. And we will have additional resources coming on. So the purpose of today is really doing a baseline of the impact of the pandemic as far as what we know. So to this point, from your perspective, actually, so if right now you are multitasking and having lots on your plate, which you most likely will, there are going to be a couple points that you'll want to engage just so that you can see a trend of what other people are dealing with, and then you can go back to multitasking. And so there'll be one of these pieces right up front to engage with, and then we'll build on that as we keep going. So not only what's happening in the pandemic with social emotional mental health of our students and staff and adults in the United States and the world, but what can we do about it? And how can we, what can we do that's kind of low-hanging fruit? And I'm going to do that out of protective factors and positive child experiences. And then because you all are working with so many different schools, you can reinforce that work with schools. And Dr. Wellman, there is a website for the program. It's actually, you should be able to find it if you Google Coping Cat and Parent Resources. I can Google that real quick and put it in the It's actually copingcatparents.com. And so that's a family engagement strategy right there for getting families involved in this process. Hadley's link is very extensive and long, but that little one afterwards is also to a quick website that you can get involved, both your families and your schools and your parents. And again, if you have anybody that, if you have a school counselor at your school, they may not know about Coping Cat or Cat Project, and the difference is Coping Cat's for elementary age and Cat Project's for adolescents. That's the only difference. Really well supported work, but they can implement that kind of stuff. There's going to be a whole list of evidence-based programs for you later on. But my hope is that the takeaway for you, this number 3 part, is you're really influencing the state of Ohio and education in the state of Ohio. And so I want to give you as many resources as possible for you to feel equipped for this work, so that when you leave, you feel a little, I mean, no hopelessness at all, and more a positive reinforcement that we're already doing great work, that what we're seeing in kids is directly based off of trauma, that it's skill, not will, and that we can impact that with what we're doing. So if we could start together with this, I would love to hear from you. What is it that you're seeing in your work with your schools? And I'm going to put this question into the chat. And we're going to go over to thank you, Dr. Wellman. This question, and we're going to pop over to this other Mentimeter. If you've never done a Mentimeter word cloud, this is going to create a word cloud of our results. So you can either use the QR code, you can do the direct link, or you can go to menti.com with the code. And I'm going to jump over to the Menti so that we can see the results as they come in. And what this means is, as you think about the mental health or social anxiety, social emotional impacts, you've already mentioned anxiety. So you might write anxiety in there. You can write as many responses as you want. Oftentimes you can do multiple responses, and we should start seeing the responses come up. And if we're not seeing it, if somebody says they've already input it, we're not seeing it, that sometimes happens with Menti, and I may need to go out and reload it. So this is what it looks like when you just start the Menti, and then hopefully people start putting things in, and we will start seeing results. There you go. So we see mental fatigue, we see lower social skills. You can put in as many answers as you want. If you know how a word cloud works, if you repeat a word, it gets bigger. So if you see a word in here that you agree with from somebody else, go ahead and type it in again, because then we can start seeing a theme from all of you around what you're seeing. So if everybody is seeing anxiety, then you want to type in anxiety yourself. So it's not like I put in burnout and my contribution is done. What you want to think is, oh yeah, anxiety, and then you put it in, you put it down. Oh, I didn't even think about that, but withdrawal, that's been huge. And then you put in the response. And again, thanks, Dr. Wellman. If you want to put it in the chat, if you're having struggles with the word cloud with Mentimeter, then we can put it in for you. But what we want to do is get, even though we're few, we're not necessarily 150 people, we can build a nice, strong word cloud. I'm going to show you the results from our word cloud compared to other groups, compared to district leaders, compared to school counselors across the country, compared to families and parents and what they think they're seeing. And so that's why we're building this out, is so that we can hear your voice, your view, what you're seeing, and we can compare it to other people, and then we'll compare it to the research, and we'll see what the research is saying is going on. So we'll take another minute or so and get everyone's perspective. Yeah, so we do have the largest head intersections to be read out loud. So right now, so far, we have frustration, we have anxiety. These are the big ones right now. We have stress, mental fatigue, burnout is pretty big. Fatigue, again, is pretty big. So we have mental fatigue and fatigue kind of connecting together. Stress, frustration, anxiety, anger, those are all pretty large on our word cloud. We'll take about 30 more seconds, and then we'll pop back and see how this compares to what other people are seeing. And just so that if people aren't, we see we have frustration is a clear winner so far. Stress and anxiety. Anxiety is probably our second highest thing that we're noticing. Stress is probably our third. Burnout, anger, fatigue, mental fatigue and fatigue are right there. Notice some of the other powerful things are on the side though. We have helplessness. We have fewer social interactions, less social interactions. We have overload, withdrawal, isolation, lack of empathy, depression, impatience. These things are incredibly life-altering mental states and mental states that affect everything that kids are doing in school. And so what we see based on what you're talking about, so let's just take this kind of mental picture here, and we can return to it at any point. And trauma. Yep. So we want to make sure we put trauma in there. So the results of trauma, if somebody doesn't mind trauma, and Michelle is getting ahead into the rest of the presentation when she talks about adverse childhood experiences. Yes, we are going to see some adverse childhood experiences in here. And the results of adverse childhood experiences. If you're familiar with the results of adverse childhood experiences, you're going to see that in the behavior of kids and adults. Remember, our adults have adverse childhood experiences. So your teachers, your district leaders, your administrators, they have ACEs. So ACEs don't stop when you're out of being a kid. Remember that we all have some sort of trauma, especially now that we're all living through this pandemic. But our trauma, if we're fortunate to have grown up in a household or an environment that did not have very many traumas, then we are having more adult traumas right now. But we know that adversity in childhood has long-lasting impacts that we'll talk about. All right, so let's just take a mental picture of this real quick. We have frustration, we have anxiety, we have stress, fatigue, we have depression, we have lack of empathy, we have anger, isolation. Let's see what that compares to with what other people are seeing, and then also with what the research says. So if we go back and we did this similar presentation with 41 parent educational leaders at a Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center event as well, and this is what they said. And so you don't have the luxury of seeing necessarily the results with you, but I have them on my screen that I can kind of do a comparison with us. And Terry said that our kids are quickly reacting to the unknown things. And so when we think about trauma and we think about adversity, that would be expected, right? That would not be a surprise to us that our kids are in heightened responses because of trauma and because of so much trauma that they've experienced the last couple of years. So they're not going to come back down as quickly to what we would hope would be a functional level or a normal level. They're going to be escalated, and then they're going to be maintain that escalation as a result. So the anxiety and the depression, the isolation, sadness, loneliness, fear, and you've already identified some of these same things. Notice that the parents are identifying stress, isolation, anxiousness, sadness, loneliness. Isolation is again huge. So these are the same things that you all mentioned. And you said frustration was your number one. And I think frustration is probably a result of a lot of these things that people are feeling. I also did this presentation with 114 administrators from around the country. And these were principals, assistant principals, district leads for school counselors. And this is what they saw during the pandemic. And if you notice, it's really similar: anxiety, depression, lack of motivation, tired, lonely, fear, sadness, depression, uncertainty, disconnection. Obviously, bigger word clouds happen when you have more people. So it's just because we had so many different people giving their contributions. But again, if you notice, they still match up with what the parents were seeing and what you're seeing. And so these themes continue with the school counselors. We had 179 school counselors, so we had quite a robust word cloud, but still, despite all of these contributions, You can see that stress, anxiety, depression, exhaustion, isolation, burnout, lack of social skills, hopelessness, all the things, very similar themes to what you're noticing. So I kind of want to just pause and take a moment and acknowledge this has been an incredibly traumatic time. And as we go through this trauma, I have been fortunate to work with school districts around the country, and I work with some school districts that the main focus has been on credit recovery. And I work with other districts, and the main focus has been on mental health. And the ironic thing is, which district do you think has more success with credit recovery? It's the districts that focus on mental health and SEL. The students bounce back academically much more quickly. And so it really is about perception, and it really is about where we're focusing our efforts on how well our students are going to come back in and be successful in school. I think Terry puts a question out there. Do we think the isolation piece is due to the fact of rapid connection with technology? I don't think it's that, in the sense that, and this is just personal, I haven't looked at the research with this, so I'm not at all saying that this, I think that when kids feel connected now, I actually think they feel connected online with people. But I think that online alone connection, research does kind of show that adolescents are getting social connection online. It can be a negative, but it can also be a positive at times. But I think without that personal reinforcement, then that's where you're getting empty isolation. I think that online alone, or social media alone, or connection through technology alone, that's what's empty. And people are struggling then to follow that up with the face-to-face and reconnecting. And I wonder, Terry and Michelle, I wonder if you're noticing the lack of the ability to build relationships in person. And I think that is the level or the piece where people then feel isolated. So I think that's worth exploring more. I think that there have been benefits of technology in the pandemic that we may not have thought about, but that it has been a massive negative as well. Thanks. Yeah, Dr. Woman has a good point here. So it's 10:10. I have about an hour left, and there's a lot of stuff in here. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly because I want you to be able to take this. As you probably see, and you can comment in the chat if you want, academics have been impacted by the pandemic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want you to have this resource. So we know that with math, people have been performing about 5 to 10 percentile points lower. This is, by the way, in fall 2020. So this is a year ago. So it's gotten, it's different now. It's a whole year later. At that point, reading hadn't been as impacted according to this data. But the experience that I've had across the country is it really varies by school. There's a really interesting article, and if you see something that's underlined, it's linked for you. So I tried to make things all accessible for you. So if you clicked on this, it'll take you right to the resource and you can download and have it. So anything that's linked, and I tried to make an asterisk, this is kind of the difference between this presentation for you versus a presentation for anybody else. I haven't linked resources like this and given them to people in the past because I didn't think people would use them the way that you all might as you're building out professional learning or training for your schools. But basically what people are projecting and what probably is going to happen is that you see quite a drop in math and reading. So up here with the bullet points, you're going to potentially see, half of the normal learning gains in math and about 3/4 or less, 2/3 of normal reading gains in reading. And I'm not sure if that's what you're seeing in the schools that you're working with. I think it varies a lot by SES. I think it varies a lot by resources that the school has, varies a lot by the family resources. And so there's another article that points out that what we've seen in the pandemic, which I think everyone can speak to, is that equity gaps have only increased. Historically marginalized populations have only been marginalized further or oppressed further or have been pushed out further from access and opportunities that other people might have. So the pandemic has only kind of increased the inequity in the systems already around academics. And so that data is yours to use. Really what I want to focus on is obviously the social emotional and the mental health impact. So if you see an end note, that resource is at the end in a reference list, and you're welcome to use those as well. But just in general, we know that adults tend to respond to crisis with anxiety, fear, and tension. And I think that you're seeing that across the country in a lot of ways. Increases in stress, increases in depression. And when we think about schools, we often are focused on students, and yet schools are full of adults, and our staff, our leaders are struggling through the pandemic as well. And that trickles down to the students as well, because children see how adults are experiencing this and they're influenced by that. Children are also more susceptible to mental health issues than adults, so that's important to remember. And I think I saw a stat, I'm gonna have to go in make sure that I have this included, but there were hundreds of thousands of kids that have had a caretaker or a family member die because of the pandemic. And so they're directly seeing the impact of the pandemic in their families, especially students of color, because the pandemic has hit particularly Black families a lot harder. And so people are experiencing that insecurity around losing parents, losing family members, and also losing basic security and seeing people lose jobs and other financial things. Again, these things are linked for you. U.S. Surgeon General just published an advisory report. Advisory reports are kind of warning reports titled Protecting Youth Mental Health. I found this to be a tremendous resource. So I encourage you to access that, download it, and use it in your work with schools. The U.S. Surgeon General uses a resource that we often use in research, which is CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey results. And since at the very beginning of the pandemic, the 2019 one actually took into consideration that that an increase of 40% of students that are feeling sad or hopeless. So I'm still going to go through this relatively quickly because we don't have enough time for everything. But again, I built more into this presentation than I had time to share with you on purpose so that you could use this. So that you could take this and talk to school boards, you could take this and talk to teachers, you could take this. And so feel free to take this research, these resources, the links, and use them in your own work. So that's really the point. So if I'm going fast, please excuse me. It's really around equipping you more than just talking at you. One of the indicators of obviously mental health is unfortunately emergency room visits. So in the pandemic, emergency room visits for suicide attempts have been up 51% for adolescent girls and 4% for adolescent boys. This doesn't mean that suicide attempts are not at the same level for adolescent boys as adolescent girls, unfortunately. Those of us that are familiar or work with suicide a lot, does anyone want to put in the chat the sad reason why that data might be that way, but not reflect a difference in suicide attempts? Or unmute and share.
Is it because they're more successful at killing themselves, so they don't actually end up in the emergency room?
That's exactly why. So like Dr. Wellman said that even though it looks like adolescent girls are attempting at a far higher rate, we know from data historically that the rates are not that far disparate. It's that the boys are using more violent means, often guns and things like that. And so the emergency room visits may not be as happening as high of a rate for boys because they're more successful. Before the pandemic, about 1 to 10 adults in the United States reported anxiety. during the pandemic, it's been up to 4 in 10, which is a 300% increase. So one way to think about that is the pandemic has resulted in a 300% increase in adults' symptoms of anxiety or depression, 300%. In Brazil, there's data out of Brazil that that kids, depending on the instrument they use, it's just 2 different instruments, they increased the percentage of kids experiencing anxiety by 233%. So the pandemic has massively increased mental health issues. And I would say in the United States, it's not just the pandemic of COVID, but it's also the racial pandemic of our students of color seeing people die by violence by people in authority. And so those pandemics have been happening, and also the socioeconomic pandemic where the inequity has only increased. So we also see that people of color in particular, people who are highly susceptible to the racist systems that are oppressing others, people in diverse and urban environments, we are seeing inequity only increase around that. And so then people are dealing with multiple levels of trauma. So it's not just the COVID-19 pandemic that's creating trauma, it's all the other traumas as well that are stacking up, which can be incredibly debilitating. Some of the research that you can also share is you mentioned in your word cloud, and other people did as well, the isolation. Before I did the research for this, I didn't realize that loneliness and isolation was an actual medical issue. It is an actual medical issue. So if people are feeling lonely, and we can see during the pandemic that the percentage of adolescents that are feeling lonely has increased. Almost half of students in college in the UK reported feeling lonely. And I think that a few of you are speaking to this in the chat. A third of adolescents, so high school, middle school students, reported feeling lonely. And feeling lonely in the pandemic has increased, we've seen from the research. And this matters, and I didn't know this before I did this research, because loneliness and isolation lead to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, self-harm, and eating disorders. So we know that not only are people feeling increases in anxiety, increase in depression, they're also feeling isolated, they're feeling lonely, and those in turn are reinforcing anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation, and all those other mental health issues. So it's a really wicked cycle going on right now. We've heard from our students in the United States. This is a fantastic resource for you to use if you'd like to use this as well. A Youth Truth Survey was taken 4 times, which is really nice because they took it before the pandemic with around 500,000 students. And then during the pandemic, they collected data from about 300,000 students. So they have pre-pandemic data from about 500,000. And then during the pandemic, you can see at different times about 300,000 students. And what they're finding is the pandemic obviously has affected students, which isn't really a big surprise. The longer the pandemic has gone on, the more students have identified that it's affecting them. Elementary kids and secondary kids about the same level, just slightly more for elementary, but not enough to be significant probably. What's interesting and a really important takeaway for me as a school counselor and faculty, as someone who works with school districts around the country with mental health and social emotional wellness and holistic wellness of kids, is that the findings really emphasize the social, emotional, and mental health obstacles to learning. There were 4 major findings that you can go into with this study, which I'm not gonna have time to go into, but the one that we're going to really think about is the #1 barrier that students identified was depression, stress, and anxiety. So we started with a little word cloud. Remember where we started? We started with a little word cloud, and you all identified things. And in that word cloud, you identified frustration, anxiety, stress. 300,000 students agree with you. Hundreds of school counseling administrators or district leads, administrators, principals, assistant principals agree with you. Almost 200 school counselors agree with you. So every level of educator or student in the United States is experiencing exactly what you're seeing in the schools. So how do we frame this? And what can we do about it? That's our next step. And Dr. Wellman's like, I can think of some things to do at home. And we're going to talk about some of those things. It's really important. Again, hopefully you've heard me emphasize the inequity around especially students of color, students of poverty, also students that are not neurotypical or cisgender or heterosexual. Anybody that identifies in a different way than white cisgender majority is going to be struggling and have more of an impact in this pandemic. And you can see this here, like obstacles to learning, feeling depressed, stressed, or anxious. People that do not identify as one of the binary ways of identifying gender, male, female, are really struggling. 83%, 8 out of 10 of our students in school that are not identifying as a binary way of identifying gender are really struggling. One of the ways that we think about how do we help people in school is bottom-up work. What we need to do is make sure that we're serving, our priority in the school should be serving those students that are least represented, that our voices are least heard. And so if we're doing our work for these kids, if we're doing our work for our students of color, if those are the priorities, then everybody benefits. If we're working with focus on students with trauma, then everybody that maybe hasn't experienced as much trauma is also going to benefit. And we'll figure out why in a second. Not surprisingly, as people separated from school and did not have access to people at school to talk to, school counselors, school nurses, teachers, school psychologists, school social workers, their feelings of depression, stress, and anxiety increased. So there was an inverse relationship between availability and those feelings. So when we think about school, often we think about it as a place for learning. It really is a place for connection. It's a place for relationship. It's a place for belonging. It's a place to be seen and heard. And if we really can focus on that, we can build protective factors. The next few slides, I'm going to go through even more quickly in a sense, because these slides talk about it before the pandemic. The pandemic has only highlighted this. Our kids were struggling with anxiety and depression and suicide and non-suicidal self-injury before the pandemic even began. So we know that kids were struggling with, these are diagnoses of anxiety and depression. So these aren't the kids that are struggling with anxiety, test anxiety. These aren't the kids that have generalized anxiety that nobody is really noticing. These are the kids that are in a medical environment that a doctor is diagnosing them with anxiety. So this is underreported in the sense we have 4.2 million students with anxiety, 3.2 million adolescents with major depressive episode. And we know that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. Feel free to use these stats again. And this, again, if we think about something that may need to be addressed on a much deeper level in every school in our country. I know we have suicide screeners, signs of suicide, but really I would love to not only screen for suicide, but prevent it. And there are ways to prevent suicide that go along with helping with trauma. The other thing we need to just reinforce again, the impact of racism is rampant and pervasive. Black children are twice as likely to die by suicide than white children, and those in poverty are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop mental health issues. So again, working to ensure that we have things that can help everybody, but especially our people who are historically marginalized. So how do we frame this? I frame it within ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Those of you that are familiar with ACEs know that it's the most famous study around ACEs was published in 1988. It was a Kaiser Permanente study. And one of the reasons it became famous, the research team was fantastic, but also the population was white middle class in California. I think it was California, maybe it was Florida. That wasn't the first ACEs study that had been done, to be transparent and blunt. There had been a few studies before that, but it had been with urban populations and people of color, and people, when it was published, had kind of said, well, yes, people are going to experience trauma when they're African Americans in these environments. And so it was another case where even the research had to be done on a majority white population for it to become mainstream and accepted and become a health crisis. So when we think about systems, we think about the ways that these influence everything that we do. So the ACEs study started with the tree above the ground. For those of you that are not as familiar, it was an in the household study. So what's happening in the household that creates traumas or potential traumas for kids? It was around abuse and neglect, mental health issues for adults in the household, incarceration of some parent in the household. Since that time, since 1988, it's expanded, and adverse childhood experiences. One of the reasons that something can be called an adverse childhood experience is the research shows a direct loading into mental health or health issues, behavioral health issues, medical issues. It's not a correlation. You remember that from your graduate school. It's a correlation, causation, correlation. These are actual loading into health issues. And we'll talk about those in a second. So the expanded ACEs that we've learned about since that time include poverty, discrimination, lack of economic mobility and social capital, poor housing quality and affordability, and violence. And you may ask, like, how are we knowing that discrimination or violence is something that we can track into outcomes? Well, there's research that shows that Afro-American populations that are living in poverty, for example, tend to have lower birth weights of children, tend to have lack of health resources, tend to have all these things that are a symptom of their environment that is not by choice, but is because of historical racism over time. And that is resulting in distinct medical outcomes. And oftentimes medical outcomes that can reduce life. And we'll get into those in a second as well. This is, by the way, this is linked. So if you want to use this slide, it's not my slide, it's from the ACEs connection. Again, I'm trying to link things for you to use. If you click on it, it'll take you right to the slide and you can see where it's from and use it yourself. I think I did that as well to this one. Yep. So these resources, again, if you're trying to teach about ACEs and adverse childhood experiences and you like these slides, I've tried to link them so that you can use them. Again, they weren't linked in previous presentations, but I think, again, the hope of this presentation is to equip you with your own stuff for you when you're doing trainings in your schools. I really enjoy this slide. I don't know all of the research around ACEs with the environmental things here. Just to be clear, I know that the World Health Organization has looked at the impact of war on health and health outcomes. I know that environmental things like these are definitely traumas. And again, the difference, when I say the difference between ACEs and traumas in general, is that we can actually connect these constructs under here to health outcomes. And the number of things that people are experiencing will have adverse effects on the health outcomes they're experiencing. So you can see things like discrimination, historical trauma, substandard schools, structural racism, lack of jobs, food scarcity. All of these things are going to impact people's health. The scary thing that is, it directly impacts somebody's COPD, for example. So somebody that has 4 or more adverse childhood experiences is going to have significantly higher likelihood of developing COPD, are going to have significantly 40 or more, 50 or more sexual partners, 50 or more sexual partners, higher unintended pregnancy. We see the mental health issues there: depression, anxiety, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of traumatic brain injuries, much higher rates of addiction to alcohol and drugs. Cancer actually increases. Diabetes is an outcome. Lower educational attainment and lower income. All these are directly related to adverse childhood experiences. So when we think about the pandemic and we think about the things that it's increased, we think about the kind of the expansion of these issues, then these are all going to be directly. So this isn't correlation again. We're not saying we think these are connected. We actually know these are connected. And so these slides, again, I'm not sure that if which ones I've linked this one, but you can always copy and paste this one as well. This is from the Center for Disease Control. So these are open access and you can use them. This is another really great slide that you can copy and use out of this presentation. It gives a wonderful connection around the different types that I've talked about. And then the outcomes of 4 or more ACEs. I talked about some related to depression, suicide, COPD, and smoking. I didn't talk about early intercourse or liver disease. But one of the famous quotes is that ACEs is the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. So it's treated as a public health threat, and the California Surgeon General treats it as the #1 threat in California, our adverse child experiences. Early death is the outcome, death in the 50s instead of the normal death range being in the 70s now. So people with 4 or more ACEs are dying almost 20 years earlier than others. And as you can see, 67% of the population has at least one adverse child experience. If we think about the pandemic, then we can add that in. If we think about the implications of the pandemic around inequity, around all those types of barriers that people are facing in their home, then we can add those on as well. One of the things, I'm going to pause here for a second, and I know I've been talking a lot and quickly. One of the things I want you to think about is trauma is about perspective. So I'm going to type in something that's helpful for me. To remember, there's little t's and there's big T traumas. And I don't get to decide which is which for my kids. When somebody tells me about a trauma, I need to listen to them to understand, is this a little T or is this a big T? And what I mean by that is, I don't mind going to the dentist. It's actually a place where I almost fall asleep, like in the chair. I'm like, all right, this is just a time I don't have to think. I don't have to do any work. I just sit there. I literally almost fall asleep. There are people who going to the dentist is a trauma. They've had traumatic experiences when they were younger. They've had traumatic experiences with fear and anxiety. Going to the dentist, that is a trauma. So just because something isn't traumatic to me doesn't mean it's not traumatic to somebody else. And so one of the dangers of thinking about adverse child experiences or thinking about traumas is we think about talking to kids, or we think about the kids bringing their backpack of trauma into schools with them. And our teachers and our adults are saying, but that shouldn't matter. That shouldn't really be traumatic for you. That's not that big a deal. My parents got divorced. I'm not sure why this is so traumatic for you. Or somebody else might say, my parents got divorced and that was incredibly life-changing and amazingly traumatic. And I'm so sorry. And the kid's like, it's fine. So we need to make sure that we're listening to, is this a little T, a big T? What kind of trauma perspective is this kid having? Because that's what defines the trauma, not how we define the trauma. When people are experiencing trauma in social conditions and generational historical trauma, we know that it actually changes the DNA. They've done studies on populations from the camps in World War II, and the children and grandchildren of the people that were in the camps, DNA is different. The transgenerational historical trauma lives beyond just us. And so we need to make sure that we're working with kids whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have experienced historical trauma, and that we are acknowledging that that exists and that that's part of the load that we're dealing with. So what that does for us, and all these slides you can take and use, what that does for us is it actually changes our neurobiology. It changes our brain pathways. But what we're even finding more is it's changing our DNA. And I kind of mentioned that earlier. We are noticing that trauma changes the DNA in people. And when people are asking kids to act a certain way or be a certain way, then we're asking them to do something that is literally difficult for their brains to do. And so that's where it's not will. We talked about skill, not will. And when we think about all of our kids coming back to schools right now, and I know that I have friends that are district leads in some of the largest school districts in the country, and they talk about parents coming in and assaulting teachers. They're talking about kids swearing at teachers, kids trying to fight with teachers, kids fighting with each other. All these things are going up. And so now the most convenient way is our kids are off the hook. They've lost their minds. They're bad. They're stressed. And what I'm wondering is, what skills do they need? What do we need to back up and reteach? What do we need to come back to the baseline of around self-regulation and empathy, compassion, and what kind of skills around hormone regulation and all these other things do we have to learn as teachers as well as our students. Thanks, Krista, putting in resources in the chat around what we're talking about. So this how ACEs work is a really useful thing. CANarratives, by the way, .org has a lot of resources and they give you them free to use if you like. So again, if you're working on trauma, then that's a resource for you. All right, big breath. That was a lot. We have about 40 minutes still to go, which is exciting to me. Now we're going to talk about the good stuff. How are we going to buffer this? What are we going to do about this in response to this? We are going to build out positive child experiences and protective factors. So Dr. Bethel is the national leader in positive child experiences, and she defines it as feeling safe in our families to talk about emotions and things that are hard, and feeling supported during tough times, hard times. And there's a resource for you there. I like that, yes. And protective factors, protective factors have been around longer than positive child experiences. Positive child experiences have been really, the research is like 5 years, a little bit older than that. Protective factors are more of a broad psychological construct. Any characteristic at the biological, psychological, family, or community level, just think that's like everything, including peers and culture, that's associated with lower likelihoods of problem outcomes. Problem outcomes are holistic in their health. One of the things I want to pause here and talk about is like social emotional learning. If social emotional learning is applied and used to control kids, that's not social emotional learning. That's adult-driven control. Social emotional learning is supposed to help kids develop holistically with their executive functioning, with their self-regulation, with their positive relationships with peers, so that they become healthy adults. An example of that is there's social emotional research that shows that social SEL was actually created by an African-American male faculty member at Yale who's still doing amazing work today. And it included student voice and parent voice and a mental health team in the schools. Those were taken out, and the most common one that we know of is CASEL. Until this last year and the year before that, CASEL didn't really have those voices of students, the voices of families, the voices of peers in their system. It had been taken by majority white populations. When I say it, I mean SEL. SEL was originally created in the African-American community, and it was taken by a lens of how can we control kids so they can be better learners. And we need to be very careful of that and give it back to the community. So there's SEL research for example, that shows teaching kids around Black historical identity, Black pride, historical figures that are strong from the African-American community is a really, really strong SEL. Creating a home place in a school, which you can talk about how do you create a home place in the school, that's SEL. It's creating a place of safety, of community, of pride and identity, so that those people can develop so that our kids can develop into holistically healthy adults, not necessarily high achievers on tests. And so if we take and we pervert SEL, then it becomes something that isn't a protective factor anymore. So we want to make sure that we're defining protective factors accurately and what we're trying to do with them. So the difference between positive child experiences and protective factors is positive child experiences really directly load into ACEs, and protective factors are more of a general psychological construct. So they're going to overlap tremendously. One is just kind of built directly into ACEs, and the other one more in a general sense. So we're going to look at positive child experiences, and then we're going to brainstorm what we do with them. And I'm going to have you engage with me and again here in a couple seconds, because I've been talking for a long time. So here are the 7 positive child experiences from this one study. Talk to family about feelings, feel like your family stands by you, participate in community traditions. We think about community traditions, we can think about all sorts of things. You can think about church community traditions, you can think about community organizations, you can think about traditions as far as like holiday traditions, you can think about, I think about the MS walk that I do all the time with my community. So what is the community traditions that people are involved with? Sense of belonging is huge, whether it's high school, elementary, middle. Sense of belonging in school is an amazing protective factor. Feeling supported by friends, having at least 2 non-parent adults. You've probably heard that many times in the past. Like that is just huge. But the key piece here is genuine interest in them, and felt safe and protected by an adult in their home. The great thing about these is that if you have positive child experiences, they will directly buffer the impact of ACEs. There's a lot of research about this coming up. There's a little dip into the research right here, but mental health, depression will go down significantly if you have 3 to 5 ACEs, and 72% lower if you have 6 to 7. So now here's our engagement together. So I'm going to go to the next slide on our Mentimeter. The next slide on our Mentimeter wants us to think about what traditions do we think of as a community or in our families that we can do to build positive childhood experiences. And we can also, if we don't want to use the Mentimeter, we can also put them in the chat, like Dr. Ballman mentioned earlier. So feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to go to the Menti. The benefit of the Menti is at the end of this, I'm going to save it. I'm going to send it to Tom, and Tom's going to send it out to you. And you're going to have all this as a resource for your own work. So you're going to have all the crowdsourced ideas around building community. You're going to have all the crowdsourced ideas we're going to have in a second around other resource building. And so if we use the Mentimeter, you're going to have these crowdsourced resources. All right, so I will stop my share and do a new share. And I will help contribute as well. And again, I may need to reload, or there we go, holidays together. Definitely. Attend community festivals and fairs for sure. Talking about days over dinner. I'm so glad you said that. I was wondering if someone was going to say things like that. Talking about our day over dinner is huge. Taking walks together is huge. Eating, just eating dinner together is huge. Playing board games, often a community event. What kind of family events do we do? Break those down for people so we can give ideas. One of the things that we can do out of this Mentimeter is we can send newsletters out to schools. We can send newsletters to families saying, hey, what are you doing this holiday season? Well, how are you spending family time together? What do you do as a common tradition in your family? Those are simple things to ask. We can ask people. Imagine if you're leaving school this holiday season and you just send something home and you just ask a one question by text. You know, what tradition will your family do together this season? You ask that one prompt, and maybe you give ideas. Maybe it's movie nights. Maybe it's drive to relatives. Maybe it's, you know, what is it that you do? And if we're asking people to do this, we're building protective factors. So I think at the beginning, people are asking, what are some simple things that I can take tomorrow back to my schools to help deal with pandemic? This is a simple thing. This is one thing. This is it right here. Michelle, thank you so much. That's perfect. We open stockings. Man, we've done that. We did that every single year growing up. We still do that. I love that, Helen. So social media with grandkids and kids out of state. So I'm asking holiday letters to friends. My mom has done that for 50 years. That is a definite tradition. And getting letters from people becomes a tradition. And I think that it could be an email too. Also, I know going to food banks and serving food banks is a tradition. Giving hot meals is a tradition. Singing carols for some people is a tradition. Being at church is a tradition. Midnight mass for some people is tradition. Morning church is a tradition. Like all sorts of, oh, I love this one. Thank you. Community murals, concerts. Exactly. Yep. Toys for toddler cousins. So what I want you to take away from this is we have all these things that you're thinking about. Not all of them need to be big. Hugs for family members, sporting events in the community, holidays together. What can we do with our schools to ask them to just ask about these? So when you're working with your schools across the state of Ohio, the more you can emphasize family traditions and community traditions and school traditions too, the more you're building protective factors and positive child experiences. Not a big heavy lift, not a big time crunch, not a big stress, but all these things will buffer the impact of the pandemic. Everything that you've written here. Let's do another one. So let's go to the next one. How are we going to create space to talk? And ideally, because I'm a counselor, it's about feelings, but how do we create space to talk about feelings in our schools or at home? So I'm going to say lunch bunches at schools, morning teacher check-ins often happen at schools. I'm going to put in drives in the car is when people talk at home. Dedicated time and oh, a feelings box, nice. I hope that you also talk about that. So what else do we do that creates space? Potential schedule planning. Check-in, check-out programs are great. Circles. Oh, circles are huge. Yeah, peer groups, love it. Peer groups are fantastic. Yeah, parent teacher family workshops, that would be fantastic. Especially, remember, you don't need to get too complicated in those workshops. You can just say, why don't we journal together? Or why don't we draw a picture around how we're feeling? Or let's draw our family. Let's draw our family and talk about it. Yes, exactly, Michelle. Informal, relaxed. Love it. We talked about before and ask questions about follow-up things that were good or bad. Mentoring is huge. All right, expand this into your own home and into the community. What do you do at home? Oh, I love that. Kindness club and meditation. That's fantastic. What do you do at school or home that creates that opportunity just to be present with each other? Again, repeat the things from last slide if they count still, like dinners. I know that, yes, movie nights, dinners, really listening, family book study, movie nights, those are huge. I wonder if somebody from the Ohio State Family Engagement Center doesn't mind putting Michelle's into the Mentimeter for us. That would be amazing service.
Do that.
Thank you. Because I want, again, what we're gonna do with the Mentimeter is we're gonna download it, we're gonna send it out to you all. So when you're thinking about a newsletter or an email or suggestions, a list of suggestions to your schools as they come back from the holidays or as they go away for the holiday break, you can just suggest a couple things. As we go away for the holiday break, we know the pandemic's been really difficult. Let's ask our families, how do they celebrate traditions in their homes? What kinds of things do they do together as a family? How do they create a sense of being present with each other and listening to each other over the holidays? If you do that, you are literally buffering trauma. You are literally changing lives. So I know at the beginning you said, I want things to do. I want things to take away. I want to make sure this is simple and easy as possible for you. These two things are going to build protective factors and positive childhood experiences. How we ask questions of kids is actually really, really important. Oftentimes we think that we need to ask kids open-ended questions. Counselors do that because then we're going to spend another 30 minutes with them. But at home, it's usually a pretty big epic fail if you ask an open-ended question, because the kids say, I don't know, or nothing, or whatever. So what I would say is whoever put in this green box is crushing that mentality of how to work with their adolescents or kid at home. It has to be a targeted question. What made you smile today? Notice how targeted that is. The kid has to answer that. What was the best part of it? What's the best part of your day? Thanks, Dr. Woman. I think you can, if we have other ideas of these types of questions, they're really helpful because I think people struggle with thinking about these targeted questions. It is very much positive CBT. So we have other people that love little mental health stuff in here. It's great. Asking about how friendships are going right now. So there are ways to do that. Again, you can do coded questions like, what did you, let's say Meredith was the friend that you were asking about. What did you and Meredith do today? Did you and Meredith hang out at lunch? Do you and Meredith have plans together? Are you guys going to go to the movie together? What was I have no idea what is going on with social media right now. What are you and Meredith laughing about lately? You know, like you're thinking about targeted things that you can ask about. There's, by the way, if we go back to either one of these questions, there's a lot of research around protective factors being school belonging, like I mentioned. So anything that you can build into schools around here that enhances school belonging. School belonging never comes out of academics. So let's just make that clear. Like, you're not going to get a feeling of school belonging because you're a high achieving school or a low achieving school. You're going to get feelings of school belonging. We've all seen those YouTube videos of the teacher at the door giving each person that comes in a different handshake. Right? So school belonging, again, I'll say that again, school belonging is never going to come out of an academic score. Like, that is not how you're going to build your school belonging. It's what you do so that each kid feels seen and each kid feels heard, each kid feels like they have a voice. One of the things I picked on SEL earlier, and I'm a huge proponent of SEL. Like, I've written articles. I love SEL. I don't like SEL that does not have student voice. I don't like SEL that doesn't have parent voice. I don't like SEL that is driven by teachers and administrators to get kids to sit still. That's not SEL to me. And so what I'm asking you to do with this, the messages you give to your schools, is to prioritize school belonging, to prioritize student voice, to prioritize parent voice. And you know what happens? You know what happened to that original school? The original study, I will send out the person's name of some of these studies. This work, the original SEL work, happened in the 60s. This is 1960s. And this is around Yale. This is in Connecticut. And the faculty member took the lowest performing schools in that community, highest poverty schools, and built a parent oversight committee, a student committee that worked. It was all a committee of student voice, parent voice, and they brought in mental health people, school counselor type, wasn't school counselor at the time probably, but school counselor type people, school psychology type people, and they had a student, an adult voice. That was the leadership of the school. It was a community leadership of the school. In a few years, achievement had changed drastically. Everything had flipped in those schools. They were high achieving schools. So if we put the health of our kids and the voice of our kids first, the achievement will follow. If you put the achievement first, the health won't follow. And I think that's the important perspective to take, is it's a win-win. If we focus on mental health and the holistic health of our kids, the achievement will follow. But if you only focus on the achievement, or you make that the priority, the health and the holistic health and mental health won't follow. That's not part of that deal. So we want to make sure that we're prioritizing what is a win-win, what our kids really need to be healthy. Thank you for these. We're going to keep going because there's even more resources in here for you. But one of the things I do want to think in your role, I'm going to table this and we're going to come back to this. So I'm going to come back to this later. That's why we're tabling it, because I'm not in the right thing that I want to share. So we're going to come back to this and go on to our next thing. So I have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes to 10 minutes in positive child experiences and protective factors. But I think because of my audience that you probably understand how powerful these are. So I'm going to just briefly touch on them. You're going to notice they overlap a lot. And the other thing that you'll notice is that they're relational. Adult provided support, peer relationships, sense of belonging at school, supported by friends, student-teacher relationship. These are relationships. Liked, enjoying school. That's the research around extracurriculars, by the way. Kids that are engaged in anything beyond that classroom are going to be more successful. Having a lot of clubs at school. It'd be really interesting. I don't know why I haven't thought about this before this exact second, but it'd be really interesting to do an assessment of how many kids are involved in high schools in some sort of extracurricular activity. And I bet there would be a correlation between that and the feeling of school safety and school belonging. the more you have your kids engaged in chess clubs, leadership clubs, newspaper, athletics, drama, the youth Christian association, the youth Muslim association, the LGBTQ ally group, the LGBTQ pride group, like everything you can think of, the more kids are going to be involved with that, the more protective factors they're going to have. One of the things we can do with that, by the way, if we think about that, is how do we include families in that? How do we include families in reinforcing that? How do we include families in engaging in that process with their kids and getting involved in some sort of activities? So when I talked about ACEs and how all those detrimental health outcomes are loaded, the exciting, incredibly powerful news is that protective factors and positive child experiences buffer and do the exact opposite loading. When I say loading, that's the important thing, because the more positive child experiences you have, the more protective factors you have, the more likely you're going to have ideal cardiovascular health, the more likely you're going to have better health outcomes. So it's the same exact loading principle as ACEs. So it's kind of like you have the negative, kryptonite, and you have the superpowers. And it's like, what's going to win? And how can we load and invest in the superpowers that our kids can have, which are our protective factors and positive child experiences? So you can build positive child experiences and lower depression as kids get older. You can lower personality disorders, such as even schizophrenia or obsessive compulsive, which, a lot of the things, obsessive compulsive disorder often walks hand in hand with anxiety over time. So a lot of these things are around reducing anxiety and reducing depression, reducing other mental health issues, and you're going to reduce future negative outcomes as well. Protective factors, you're going to see them overlapping with positive childhood experiences. Remember, again, they're very similar. It's just positive child experiences load directly into adverse child experiences. Protective factors have been around longer and are really more general psychological constructs as buffering agents. However, same thing, you're going to see school belonging. You're going to see a lot of relationships. You're going to see peer intimacy. Pro-social friends means you have friends that care about you simply because you matter. They're not trying to get anything out of that friendship. That's what pro-social is defined as. Support from class, support from peers. So teachers matter in a great way here. Friends matter in a great way. How we build resilience is really important. Again, research is going to say similar things. The more protective factors you have, the more likely you're going to experience school success, better health overall, and a reduction in depression, anxiety, mental health issues. Unfortunately, we know in high school there's often dating abuse. The more social support or empathy that you have from your peers, the research shows it's likely to buffer the potential trauma of dating abuse. So these things have significant real life effects for our kids and adolescents. Again, substance abuse is going to be less likely. Strong social bonds and relationships are going to help people decrease anxiety, decrease being rearrested if they're having that, increase emotional regulation, and increase mental health.
Dr. Zyromski, I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have like a go-to article or meta-analysis for, I'm sure that there are some teachers or families out there thinking to themselves, if we can just get our kids caught up, if we can just get them to focus on like our math class, and feel confident in math, then all those other things will start falling into place. They just had so much, disruption. So we just need to focus on content. Is there do you have kind of a response to that, or a meta-analysis or something like that that's kind of influential to say like, well, actually that math thing can be coupled with, all these other strategies, because they are equally, if not more important right now, for our, future outcomes for students.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I tend to, I don't know if I have an article that directly speaks to that, but we can definitely talk about it later and I can think about it further. I do have research from interventions in schools that have nothing to do with math. That
math was just an example.
No, it's a great example because it is a priority. But for example, the student success skills intervention, which is just happens to be a school counseling intervention, it increases students' motivation, self-knowledge, self-direction, and positive relationships with others. So again, it impacts motivation, self-knowledge, self-direction, and positive relationships. There's also been research on it that shows that it increases executive functioning. Oops, sorry about the functioning. School belonging. And this was with diverse populations. So these studies were not with like majority white populations. These studies were with all sorts of Latinx populations and African-American populations, and it showed outcomes like that throughout all populations. And what it found was that it also increased math scores. And so I think what I tend to do when I'm talking to districts is you don't need to focus on math to impact math. And in fact, the effect size, which is, you know, getting into nerdy stuff now, but the effect size for SSS, I think is about 0.48 in math, which is a grade level. So if you went into math and I went into math and you did not get student success skills and I did, I will be a grade level ahead of you by the end of the year. What that means in my communication with school districts is just like chill, relax a little bit, because if you're focusing again on math, the data, the other phrase that we use a lot is data is never the problem and data is never the solution. If you think the math data is the problem and you focus on the math data, you're never going to see the math data change dramatically. If you do root cause analysis, you're going to find that what we were talking about today is the root cause of your math struggles, kids that aren't able to focus because of all the pandemic issues, because of the violence they're seeing on TV and they're seeing in their communities, you know, family members dying, you know, instability, as far as all those things are the issues. And so if we deal with those issues, and then we also help kids deal with the self-regulation and the emotional things and getting voice and building connection and creating pride and being mentored by people who look like they do and maybe not look like me, then what you're going to see is math increasing dramatically. And so I'm not sure that I have an article. Oh, I wrote an article on that. I think I have an article that I wrote on that. That's so funny. I'll send that to you. I forgot that I wrote that.
Thank you.
It's
You'll think of 3 more things after this.
Yeah, I'll think of some other things too, but anyway. So we have about 10 minutes left. So let's not go to the Menti here, but let's do in the chat, let's do a chat contribution. We'll save the chat too. We can send that out as well. But you've all listened now, and we've talked about the power of relationships. We've talked about the power of school belonging. We've talked about protective factors. We've talked about positive child experiences. So when you're working with your schools, what type of questions do you need to be asking of those administrators, of those teachers, of the staff, to find out if they're doing this work? So I would want to know, for example, you know, like, how do you focus on building positive school belonging? You know, what are the questions? I'm going to keep writing questions because, as you can tell, I like talking and I like writing. So I'm going to keep doing my questions, but you jump in with your questions in the chat too. I want to know, like, how do you engage families? You know, how do you establish school traditions? Oh, love it, Marla. Yours is better than mine on that one. So how do you gauge your community? Love it. How do you establish? I love that. How are you talking about the show? So definitely keep brainstorming together. I had one in my head and it just escaped me. Traditions. What do teachers do to build relationships with students? What type of peer programming do you have? do you have? Oh, Hadley, I love that one. Oh, that's a great one too. Oh, Marla, it's crushing that one. Thank you so much. I want to go down Marla's path a little bit, because a lot of times we have schools where the students and the staff do not look the same. And so how do you celebrate the different cultures? How does your staff involve parents and community and cultures that may look different than they do? What type of social justice training do you do in your school? Oh, that's a good one, because of raw families. Yeah, these are great. Oh, that's an awesome one, Joshua. I haven't thought about that too. How do you celebrate your family's cultures and traditions? Let's see, SEL prioritized highly. Oh, again, I'm going to go down Marla's path. How is restorative justice, by the way, we did write an article about restorative justice buffering trauma. So how's restorative justice used in your school? Would be important to me. How is discipline used in your school? Discipline is just another avenue for racial injustice. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. You know, what do you have posted on your walls in the halls? Oh, Dr. Wellman, that's an outstanding one. Do you have resource lists for families? All right. Oh, and that's awesome too. I love that one. When I was a school counselor, and this is, I know this is being recorded, and that's fine. I was doing a small group in an Appalachian area, and I had one of, I think, 2 or 3 African-American students in my group, and he was a 6th or 7th grade, I think 6th grade African-American boy. And he basically said in the small group, look around, what do you see? I'm the only Black kid in this school. There's like 2 other Black kids. We have racial issues in our school. And we talked about it in that small group. And I went to the principal and I said, so-and-so just brought this up in group. It was, I didn't say it like that. Obviously I didn't violate that confidentiality. I said, we have an issue in our school around race. We need to address this. I'm noticing that we have these things. So I used the information to argue, and the principal said, we don't have that issue here. We're not going to do anything. And I've heard that repeated in different ways over the last 15 years of my work with schools. And so I think that's something that we want to keep fighting for. So when we build these factors at schools, this is a resource I want to give you. If you click on these links, we are publishing an article right now. It's in press. I didn't give you the whole article. I can give that to you if you're the kind of person that likes to read research, but I gave you the tables out of it. And the tables, what the tables have, are we researched evidence-based programs. Those of you that wanted to walk out the door with evidence-based programs you could use, these are your tables. They're not exhaustive. In other words, even since we started doing this research, there's probably another 10 or 15 evidence-based programs that we could have researched that we did not. So let me make sure that that's clear. This is a sample of evidence-based programs. So if you look on the left column, you can see the evidence-based program. If you look in the next column, you can see the grade that it works with, the tier. So this is using multi-tier systems of support. And then which positive childhood experience does it impact? So if you're trying to build peer relationships, you can see you could use the 4 R's in pre-K through 8 for the whole school. You could also know that you're going to build teacher-student relationships. These are marked based on the empirical research we found related to this program. So it may influence more, but only were the outcomes that we found empirically in the research marked. So, you know, big brothers, big sisters may impact more things, you know, like maybe you start to do things with their friends and they feel supported by friends, but that's not what the research showed. So we didn't mark that. So if you go through this, you can see there are some that are influencing things even more than others. You can see second step, which is widely used, is going to influence these 4 things, steps to respect, these 2. So you can even do a quick assessment of what programs are being done at the school. Are they being done with fidelity? Are they being intentional? And how can we build on them? So Lions Quest is a really good one. If you put these 2 together, and those people that are particularly like nerding out on this stuff with me, then you can go and find out which studies support those outcomes. If you go to protective factors, you're going to see that there's more protective factors at the top. Same study, I mean, same interventions. So together, correct. These are linked in the, and if you wanted to, you could copy and paste the links from that slide, but the slide has the links directly. But so you can go and you can see Lions Quest. Holy cow, Lions Quest might be a really good investment for our school, for our middle school or high school, because it has this many links. Positive action, also a lot of outcomes. Paths, a lot of outcomes. And again, student success skills, I told you about earlier. So this is kind of a one-stop shop for a sample of evidence-based programs that you know the research has showed empirically connect to building protective factors for positive childhood experiences. So that's a takeaway that I was hoping that you could take with you today as well from an article that we're publishing out. Let me know if you have any questions or thoughts or comments in the chat on that as we keep going, because I have about 2 minutes and a few slides still to get to. But hopefully that's, yes, Marla, great question. When this was created, these tables, the evidence-based interventions on the left, in the article explains how they were created. In order to be defined as an evidence-based intervention, it had to be listed in the What Works Clearinghouse or Castle's evidence-based list, or there were 2 other evidence-based warehouses that they had to meet a certain level. So each of these you can trust are evidence-based at some level. You know how they have different levels of evidence, but at least a minimum level of evidence. Yep. So they're not like, you're not guessing whether they're evidenced or not. The other thing that we can
Dr.
really
Z.
use is the whole family, whole child framework from Ohio. Because if you look at these, social emotional learning, school and child nutrition, health services, family engagement, community involvement, wellness and self-care, school climate and culture, school belonging is right in here. You know, all of these can be used to argue for equitable and culturally responsive. Yep, perfect. Thanks, Dr. Wellman. Not all of them, for sure. And it's actually, it is inclusive. It's not inclusive of all PCEs, but it's also, the note is it's not inclusive of all evidence-based programs. So there are other evidence-based programs that would work. We just didn't include them in our list. So that's a sample of evidence-based programs. I think we hit most of the PCEs. That could be done in school. It is school focused. So anyway, back to the whole child framework, you can use this as in your advocacy around breaking out school belonging, relationships, equity, building things out. And you can ask schools, where is this being done in which piece of the whole child framework? And so this can be used as an advocacy tool as well. One of the things that we reinforce in school counseling is all kids deserve this because they breathe. So when we do this work, we want to make sure that we're building this out for every single kid in the school. If you say that this is a lunch bunch, well, then you're only going to hit the kids that show up for the lunch bunch. We want to make sure that when we're building out trauma-informed work, we're doing it so every single kid in the school gets it. And that's really important to emphasize as you keep going. The other way that you can build this out is, again, the SEL standards, but you've already heard me speak to this multiple times. This is great as long as you add in the parent voice, the family voice, the student voice, and making sure that those people are at the table to do leadership and that the standards aren't being applied just to control our kids and make them sit still. We can also do work that intentionally is assessed. So when we think about assessing this work, I want to think about that as well, because you're working with these school districts and you're saying, I want you to build school belonging. I want you to build positive relationships. So these are constructs that actually have instruments. We know that we have the Ohio assessment once a year around school safety. There are free instruments that will assess feelings of school belonging, that will assess executive functioning, that will assess positive relationships to others, that will assess hope. We were going to do a chat waterfall, but my time is already over, so I'm not going to do a chat waterfall right now. But think about what I want you to take away from this is not work that is done in a vacuum or that cannot be measured. We can actually measure the impact of building protective factors. We can measure the impact of increasing school belonging. We can impact hope. Hope has tremendous outcomes. Hope is a better predictor of post-secondary success than ACT scores, SAT scores, or GPA. Hope is incredibly powerful. We can assess hope with a free hope instrument. So there are free instruments. Panorama assesses school belonging. So a lot of districts use Panorama. So we can think about what instruments are already being used, what free instruments are out there. You can demand your schools to measure this and give you results year after year as part of their school improvement. This is not something that we suggest. We can literally demand and evaluate this. Family and school partnerships are incredibly important. There are a lot of resources at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center website. These are just the core building protective factors processes. How can schools create trust with families? How can schools strive to understand families' cultures and beliefs? How can they value and celebrate traditions of families? How are we going to evaluate and share progress? How do you inform family and student voice? And how do schools inform their work by listening to families? So again, more resources out there for you. National resources, each of these links is incredibly powerful. So if you went to the Castle Roadmap for Return to School, or APA has a Return to School, Department of Civil Education, Civil Rights, Department of Education Civil Rights has an amazing handout here. The disparate impacts of COVID-19 on America's students, that's an amazing resource for you. Surgeon General's Mental Health Youth Advisory that I was telling you about earlier is linked right here for you. So all of these links are things that you might want to use as you continue training and working with your schools. If you need things right away, like your kids are in trauma, there's some information briefs for you, suicide prevention, National Institute of Mental Health, and symptoms of mental health issues in schools that you can take with you. So as we finish up, I'm really hoping that you continue pushing the partnerships with families that I know you've been working with Dr. Brune and Tom for, I think, 8 years on this. So I'm just a little piece of this massive thing you've already been building. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of speak to and inform this work. But building on what you're already doing is such a strengths-based approach. And then making sure that we're using the language of assessment and not just asking people to do it, but asking them to assess the impact of that work. And again, instead of the Mentimeter, let's do the chat. What's one takeaway in the chat that you're going to have from this presentation? What's your one takeaway? So it's one thing that you're going to leave with, if you don't mind writing in the chat from this presentation. The importance of advocacy. Thanks, Hadley. Oh, Terry, that makes me so happy that you wrote that. Include family and student voices in the development. Important voice. Thank you, Marla. Awesome. Coaches are so huge. Yeah. I'm glad, Trisha, that you found simple ways Excellent, excellent, Alexandra. Thank you. Oh, Marla, I could go on about Hope. This isn't even a Hope presentation, but I am a huge fan of Hope. And there's a book that you can get. Where is it? Over here. It's a great Hope book. I don't know if I have it upside down or whatever, but I think I gave it to somebody to read. But if you're interested in Hope, reach out and we can get you. I can get you that book as well. But Hope is incredibly powerful on many different layers. So if you got this presentation, then you also have references, and I also included the. I took the link up, but in the very first page again, you have the link to the presentation, and feel free to take whatever can be useful for you and use it, and to build out your own work with your schools. So again, thank you. Are you interested in the book too? All right, as soon as I stop talking, I'll Google it and then put it in the chat. So, well, thank you everybody for this opportunity, and I really appreciated it. And thank you, Dr. Wellman, for putting that link back in there one more time. And thanks, Tom, for inviting me in today.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Zyromski. I see people, a lot of thanks for your time and what you put together for us today in the chat. That was, I think, just super on the nose, and I appreciate how resource laden and applicable it can be for this group. If you have any additional questions coming in here, feel free to throw them in the chat really quick. But I do just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Zyromski, for your presentation today. We are running up against our time, which is great. It's unbelievable piece of learning that we got in here today. We are coming back in January for another professional learning series. It will focus on school wellness and family engagement. We'll have presenters from Miami University in the Ohio School Wellness Initiative discussing their work in a similar vein here. So we'll have another perspective on that. To make sure that we keep having these really great conversations, I'm going to ask that you please take our little exit survey that I'm going to drop in the chat right now. We have a couple more minutes left in this meeting, so if you could just take it and make sure that we keep getting you what you need, when you need it, how you need it, that would be super helpful. With that, however, I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. We'll stay in the room for a couple more minutes to answer any questions or take care of anything that's on your mind. But please just take that survey, give another shout out to Dr. Z, and enjoy your days. Thank you guys for stopping by today.